Good morning, everyone. I see there are a lot of people still filtering in, so we will give them a few more. I hope that's okay. We will start promptly once we're comfortable with the number of people filtering in. Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on this fairly chilly morning. If you're joining from Johannesburg, I'm not sure what the rest of the country is like. Very excited to be presenting the new Brc Rams Amplify release to the market. I'll do a brief introduction and I'll hand over to Hendrik, who's our measurement lead from Ipsos. Just some housekeeping. If you are going to share anything on social media, we do have a hashtag. It's hashtag BRC Rams. Please feel free to visit our social platforms on LinkedIn and Facebook. Search for Broadcast Research Council of South Africa, and you'll find us, and please feel free to engage. We will leave questions and answers till the end. Well, not necessarily the questions. You're more than welcome to put your questions into either the Q&A or the chat function, and we will try our best to attend to all the questions at the end of the presentation. If we can't, we will be putting up a FAQ section on our website, and we'll also address any other questions that come in via our website. And we also urge everyone on the call to please send through questions directly to us if things come up after the presentation, after you've looked at the deck in more detail. Please feel free to engage with us directly. All of our contact details are on our BRC website, brc.org.za. At the contact page, there are a number of mail addresses you can use there to connect with us. Right, without further ado, I think let's get started. So before we jump into the data, which I'm sure you're all waiting with bated breath to view, I just want to give some background, some context in terms of where we were pre-COVID and where we are currently now. So pre-COVID, we ran a 7-day diary, manual completion, face-to-face method. And then COVID hit and we were unable to go back into field. And there were two reasons. One being ethical concerns, safety for the public. And the other being that we didn't want to break the law. Our lockdown regulations, they weren't that open to face-to-face research going on. So we were left with our Q1 2020 release, and we've not had a currency release since then. We did have some interim data at a total radio level during the course of this year. However, it was not currency data and it was not at a station level. So this is a very special release that we're very proud of. So when the pandemic hit, we looked at what our options were, and our mandate was to provide a stable currency that would never be affected by an outside factor such as a pandemic. We knew that we were dreaming if we felt like we could go back to face-to-face interviewing anytime soon. So we decided to open up to the market, to all suppliers in the form of an RFP to get best-in-class thinking and to provide a blank canvas, really, to all the potential suppliers. And we looked at large suppliers, looked at they collaborate in different ways. And in this current iteration, there is collaboration going on between Ipsos and other entities in the market that promote research expertise in the South African market, as these are South African companies that are assisting Ipsos, which is a global entity, but obviously have offices here in South Africa. And we were not let down with the response that we got. And the judging panel was really a collaborative effort. We invited members from the entire industry. We had representation from the AMF. We invited government representatives to sit on the judging panel, members from the MRF. It was all encompassing. We wanted to make sure that we were meeting the needs of all sectors of the industry. There had already been calls for improvements to be made to the study. In terms of the 7-day diary, a 7-day diary does what it does. It provides listening over a 7-day period. It's a manual entry, and respondents record what they listen to every quarter hour, and that's what it provides. But we needed more granular information, more granular insights for the market, for the broadcasters. We're also looking at upping our frequency of data releases. And with this new iteration, I don't want to take Hendrik's thunder, we're able to release data into the market more frequently. And there's a long-term vision of getting to a point of possible overnight ratings. But at this point in time, we're doing our base release. And from there, we'll look at possibly doing monthly releases. There were also calls for more inclusivity. Our sample size previously was 30,000 strong. We now have two sections of the currency, one being telephonic interviews, the other being a passive listening panel, and combined the sample is up to 40,000 respondents. So this is all very, very exciting, and we're very, very pleased with how the study has progressed. I just want to make it clear to everyone, some people call it a miracle, and I suppose it is. We appointed Ipsos in Q1 of this year. In Q2, they were in field, and we're now sitting with a release of data. It's quite miraculous. But just to remind everyone, after Q2 fieldwork, the members, the radio members, we all got together and we said, we need to get an independent view. We need to know, should we be releasing this data into the market, seeing that we didn't have a full year's worth of data. So we decided to commission Robert Rood and Brenda Wortley of 3M3A, as well as Professor Arjen Nettling, to scrutinize the data. And they've deemed the data fit for release. And here we sit today. And with that, I'll hand over to Hendrik. Take it away, Hendrik.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Good morning, everybody. It's a great privilege for Ipsos to address the industry, broadcasters and users of this information with our first release. My slide transitions are a bit slow sometimes, so just bear with me. Right, what we're presenting today comprises the sample from the telephonic interviews. I'll just explain briefly how we do that. We use the CATI system, so the computer-assisted telephonic interviewing system, to do interviews. And we phone up people and ask them general questions, demographic questions. We ask them the radio stations they listened to in the past 7 days. And then we focus on the radio stations or station they listened to yesterday. And for the yesterday station, we drill down into quarter hours. So you'll see a bit later on, we present two audience readings, a past 7-day reading, and then a yesterday, or you might call it an average day audience. How we do the telephonic interviews is through what we call random digit dialing. We want to achieve a random sample, and to do that, we generate random cell phone numbers with all the prefixes that are used in this jurisdiction. And that is the only control we place up front. So there's no further active selection of samples or quotas. And we thereby get a random distribution of the South African population. We know that 95% or more now of South Africans have cell phones, so we're confident that the sample we achieve is a good representation. This method is followed, or the day after recall. The DAR stands for day after recall. This method is used in several other countries, and particularly by Ipsos in Italy. We conduct 3,000 interviews every month. So starting in April up to August this year, we've conducted 15,000 interviews, or just over 15,000. What I'm showing you here is what I wanted to say about the 3,000 interviews. We obviously spread them equally across every day of the month. The data I'll share with you later on will be the accumulated April to August data. However, what I want to show you here is how the sample falls out month by month. This is the sample of 3,000. Just to illustrate that the distribution is pretty consistent month on month, and it generally follows the population distribution. So we don't see any major fluctuations here. Here we have the actual sample, the unweighted sample distributions for April to August. So we achieved just over 15,000 interviews. We're looking at metropolitan sample of just over 6,000, urban or non-metro urban sample of just over 5,000, and a rural sample of just under 4,000. If we look at the population group, gender, age, and NLI or neighborhood lifestyle indicator distributions within those, we see fairly good distributions. We then weight the data. We're obviously not reporting on raw samples. We weight the data and project it to population or population statistics. This particular set is based on the slightly older population estimates from Stats SA that we use with the help from GeoTerra Image or Professor Neetling. During our scrutiny, during our audit process, the new estimates were released, but for timing purposes, we decided to stay with the previous estimates. So in subsequent releases, we will obviously use the updated population statistics. These are just the details of how the weights or the projections are, or the population statistics are estimated and arrived at. I won't dwell too much on that, but that's there for anyone to read. During our scrutiny process, we look at various aspects of the data. We did an earlier scrutiny after 3 months in June this year, after which we then went into an audit, and we then accumulated additional 2 months of data and decided to release that. We first look at how the sample falls out and if we are covered in all the important cells. We then look at the stability of the data. For the stability, we compared the 3 months to the 5 month data to see if there were any great fluctuations. We then look at the weights and the weighting efficiencies, and finally at radio stations. Here we have, I'm just showing you the comparison of the sample distribution. So if we look at the bar chart, the black bars represent the population distribution, so what we expect to achieve. The light gray was the distributions in April and June, and the blue is the weighted distributions in April to August. So we can see that by and large, we are following the national distribution as far as province is concerned. We are slightly underrepresented in Western Cape, where I've got a 9% proportion there, and we're hoping to get 12%, and also in the Eastern Cape. However, if we look at the weighting efficiencies, we have an overall efficiency of 79%, which is quite high. We are aiming for 80%. That's the gold standard, and we're hoping with further accumulated samples that we will reach the 80% mark for overall efficiency. Within provinces, all provinces have a weighting efficiency of over 80%, except Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and Northwest Province. Briefly, these are the weighting variables we use. We do a very detailed weighting process within province, and within province we do the weights by community or geotype or community size, and within those by population group, gender, age group. And then a weight that you might not be familiar with is the day of the week weight. Because we are spreading the sample over days of the month and days of the week, we need to make sure that those proportions over the days are equal. So that's an additional weighting regime we add. So this is the table again I showed earlier, and these are the weighted results for April to August. We've projected the results to the total population of 42.5 million, a 19 million metropolitan population, 12 million urban, and 12 million rural. And here you can see the proportions, the weighted proportions by population group, gender, age, and NLI. And just to show you quickly how the weighting efficiencies have progressed, we first looked at a 3-month, then a 4-month, and then a 5-month data set. So as you can see, for most provinces, the efficiencies have consistently improved. And we hope the improvements in Eastern Cape and Limpopo and Northwest will continue so we can reach the 80% mark. Right, so the more important section, so some of the key findings. Obviously, when we do the fieldwork, the telephonic interviews, we interview radio listeners and non-listeners to enable us to do a proper penetration or reach estimate. So we can see in terms of a past 7-day audience, 82% of the population listened to a radio station in the past 7 days. To get the Monday to Sunday figure, we look at the average day, obviously, spread over a week. And we see that what we call average day listening or yesterday listening is 53%. The weekday reach is 54%, and the weekend, Saturday, Sunday reach is slightly lower at 47%. This is the past 7-day audience by province. So in Gauteng, 9.5 million, KZN 6.5 million, Western Cape 4.3 million, Northwest 2.5 million, Limpopo 3.2 million, and Mpumalanga 2.7 million, Eastern Cape 3.7 million, Free State 1.8 million, and Northern Cape just over 700,000. We can, based on the quarter hours that we collect, the quarter hour data, estimated time spent listening. We do see quite, at the total level, quite a high level or quite a long TSL, just over 5 hours on an average day. We see that there's a bit of variance by province. So the shortest listening hours on average we find in Limpopo province and the longest in KZN. In terms of geotype, the listening hours are more or less on par. If we look at population group, the shorter listening hours in the Indian population and the longest amongst Black listeners. And again, also quite interesting variance by home language. The longest listening hours being amongst isiNdebele listeners and the shortest amongst Tshivenda listeners. We also we looked at people who listened to only one radio station in the past 7 days, taking that as a sort of an unduplicated or loyal listener. So we see 40% of past 7-day listeners listen to only one station in the past 7 days. That percentage is the highest in the Northern Cape and the lowest in Gauteng province. You can also see that that level of loyalty decreases as you move up in SEM. So the SEM1, 48%, down to SEM3, SEM10, where 36% said they listened to only one station in the past 7 days. If we look at the source of transmission, 44%, and here, sorry, just to remind you, here we're basing the percentages on the yesterday or the average day listening. So 44% via normal transistor radio, 29% via cell phone with an FM receiver, 24% on a car radio, and 14% via DSTV radio channels. In terms of digital sources, 2% streaming in a car, 2% on streaming on a cell phone or a website, 3% through an app, another 3% through a smart speaker, and 1% on a PC or laptop. These are duplicated transmission sources. So what we did was to dedupe them and look at the percentages of terrestrial only transmission sources. Those were 92%. The digital only transmission sources, 4%. And then there was a 4% of listeners who combined terrestrial and digital transmission. In terms of location, most of the listening has been taking place at home. That figure is probably affected or influenced by lockdown. That will be interesting to see how that progresses over time. 21% of listening in cars and 9% at work. These are the lists of content or programs people like to listen to most, with music in the lead at 86%, local news 85%, weather 79%, advice 71%, funeral notices only at 41%. We also ask a question in the CATI interview about other media people used in the past 7 days. And here I'm comparing those media to the different radio audiences. If we look at radio in the past 7 days, that's 82%, social messaging or chat 73%, free-to-air television 67%, and so on. You can see the predominance of social media and digital sources in the general media landscape. If we look at the digital or radio transmission sources, comparing that to a radio average day is 53%, as I've said before, 44% via normal transistor radio, then 29% by cell phone. The yellow bars are based on average day listening, so just keep that in mind. But this chart gives us a pretty good picture of the kinds of media that radio comes up against in an average listener's world. Right, I'm just checking my phone for timing. Let's look at the SEMs and how the radio audiences look like there. This is the SEM profile in the total sample. If we look at SEM1 radio listeners, 54% of them live in metro areas. The largest proportion we find in KZN. Most of the listening, or the average day listening, happens on transistor radios or on cell phones with transistors. SEM2, slightly lower metropolitan population, again a large proportion in KZN, and again transistor radios and cell phone FM frequencies are the most prevalent. SEM3, we see the metro population, the rural, I've been saying metro, the rural population decreasing. And as we go along, the urban and metro population proportion increasing. So with SEM3, we can see KZN is still high, but Gauteng province is increasing its proportion. The listening still on transistor radio or transistor cell phone, but we see an increase in car radios and DSTV radio stations. SEM4 increasing the metropolitan proportion. Gauteng province now on a par with KZN, and further increases in car radio listening and DSTV radio stations. SEM5, again, increased metropolitan population. Now we see a province like Gauteng having the largest share of this SEM. And the transmission sources, again, terrestrial dominating, but DSTV radio stations and car radio also increasing. SEM6, Gauteng and Western Cape become predominant, as well as KZN. SEM7, we can see 50% of the population lives in metropolitan areas. Gauteng has 31% share of SEM7, KZN 17, and Western Cape an increased percentage at 15%. You can see quite a sharp increase in radio listening in the car, as well as DSTV radio stations. SEM8, we see quite a strong leap in car radio listening, and also Gauteng taking the lion's share of that population, being 60% in metro areas. SEM9, this trend then continues. We see car radio listening overtaking normal transistor or hi-fi radio listening, and we see the Western Cape proportion increasing alongside Gauteng. And then finally, SEM10, where car radio listening is by far the most prevalent. 2/3 of the population lives in metro areas, and Gauteng and Western Cape dominate the proportions. Right, let's look at some of the SEM profiles by station. 702, SEM7 or above, 5FM similar, Cape Talk, SEM8 or above, 657, apologies for that double 5 there, or radio pulpit or radio console. That's got quite a wide spread of SEMs, including 3 to 5 and then 8 or above. 947, SEM7 or above. 99.2 YFM, again a wide spread of SEMs with a slight mode in SEM8. Algoa FM similar. Capricorn FM is skewed towards SEM2 to 5. Classic FM, which doesn't exist anymore. We included the data here for April to June. But that station was focused or skewed towards SEM8 to 10. East Coast Radio, a general equal spread of SEMs. Logasi FM, the skew in SEM1 to 6. Good Hope FM, the skew in SEM7 to 10. Heart FM, SEM6 and above. Ikwekwezi, SEM2 to 6. Jacaranda FM, SEM8 to 10. Kaya FM, SEM7 to 10. KFM, SEM, quite a widespread, SEM 5 to 10, Lesedi, SEM 2 to 5, Liguala Guala, SEM 2 to 6, LM radio skewed to SEM 8 and above. Lotus FM, SEM 7 or above. Metro FM, SEM 3 to 8. Motweding, SEM 2 to 5. Similar for Mungana Lonene. OFM, SEM 7 to 10. Pala Pala, SEM 2 to 4. Power FM, a widespread SEM 5 to 9. Radio 2000, also quite widely spread, SEM 4 to 10. Rise FM, SEM 4 to 8. That is here, SEM 6 to 10. Continuing with the commercial and PBS stations, SA FM, SEM 4 to 10, Smile FM, SEM 6 to 10, Tobela FM, SEM 2 to 5, True FM, SEM 3 to 6, Ukhozi FM, SEM 2 to 6. Mhlobo Wenene, SEM 2 to 6, Vuma FM, SEM 3 to 4, and then with a cluster of listeners in SEM 7. UFM, SEM 4 to, I'd say, SEM 7, but again, it's quite widely spread across some of the other SEMs. Hot 102.7, which was launched in July this year as a commercial station in Gauteng, predominantly SEM 2, XK FM, SEM 7 and 8. And finally, Magic FM, mostly SEM 9. For the community stations, we're including stations here for this presentation. We had a raw sample of 40 or above. So we can see Jozi FM, quite a widespread with the emphasis on SEM 4 to 8. Izwi Lumzanzi is SEM 2 to 6. Teta FM, SEM 10 to 7. Kasi FM, SEM 5 to 8. Radio Zibonele, SEM 3 to 5. Kumazi FM, skewed towards SEM 3 to 5. Ikora FM, SEM 2 to 5. Vembe 102.4, quite a widespread from SEM 1 to 7. Inanda FM, again, spread across the SEMs with an emphasis on SEM 4. And My King community radio station, predominantly SEM 2 to 5. Rainbow FM, SEM 2 to 5. Imbokodo, SEM 2 to 5. And Maputaland community radio station, SEM 2 to 5. Let's look at device and location by each of the stations. What I will be showing you is the broken down elements, not the unduplicated transmission sources, but those are available. Right, first the terrestrial sources. 702 car radio, I'll just call out the sort of highest percentages. 5 FM car radio, 99.2 YFM car radio, 947 car radio. These are stations that have large audiences in metropolitan areas at the SEMs, and we saw how the prevalence of car radio listening increases in those segments. 567 Cape Talk, that's normal transistor radios, and pulpit, radio pulpit or radio console, car radio. Algoa FM car radio, Capricorn FM cell phone with transistor reception, East Coast radio, car radio, Gagazi either normal transistor radio or a cell phone transistor. Good Hope FM, a normal car radio. Heart 104.9, transistor radio or car. Ikwekwezi, transistor radio. Jacaranda, transistor radio or car. Kaya FM, either transistor or car. KFM, mostly car radio. Lesedi, again, just transistor radios. And Ligwala Gwala, a transistor radio. Lotus FM, likewise, transistor radio. Metro FM, quite interesting with the spread across sources, with transistor radios, car radios, and cell phone with FM reception. Motsweding FM, a car radio, normal transistor radio, and Ngana Lunene, also a transistor radio. OFM, dominated by car radios. Pala FM, a transistor radio. Power FM, either transistor radio or normal car radio. Radio 2000, again, any of those three transmission sources. Rise FM, car radios or cell phones. That is here, mostly a transistor radio. SAFM, car radio and transistor and cell phones head on head. Tobela FM, normal transistor radio. True FM spread across the three sources, terrestrial sources, Okozi FM, transistor radio, Mshlobo Winene, transistor radio, UFM, car radio. Vuma, either transistor or cell phone. Classic FM was mostly transistor radio. LM radio, car. Smile FM, car. Hot 1027, mostly car, followed by transistor radio. XK FM, all the listeners used transistor radios, the same with Magic FM, transistor radio or car. Then some of the community stations. Josie FM, transistor radio, Izvila Mzansi, transistor radio, Teta FM, and Kasi FM, either transistor radio or cell phone. Gumazi FM, cell phone, transistor radio, followed by normal transistor radio. Kurora FM, transistor radio. Mahikeng community radio or cell phone. Ikora FM, radio or cell phone. Maputaland community radio, also radio or cell phone. Vembe radio or cell phone. Inanda radio or cell phone. And Rainbow FM, either of the three terrestrial sources. Imbokodo and Radio Zibunele, either radio or cell phone. Let's look at the digital sources. Overall, the percentages are lower than terrestrial sources like we saw. For most stations, it's DSTV radio channels. Actually, I need to correct this. In our overcoding exercise, we included DSTV radio channels under terrestrial. So just keep that in mind. Smart speakers seem to be quite popular for most of these stations. For YFM, we also see digital streaming on the cell phone app. 567 Cape Talk, quite a lot of usage of the cell phone app. Radio Pulpit or Radio Console, streaming on a cell phone from a website. Algo FM has spread across different digital sources. Capricorn FM, smart speaker. So I won't call out the radio channels here. East Coast Radio, smart speaker. Gagazi, also smart speaker. Same for Good Hope FM, some smart speaker and streaming or web. So streaming from a cell phone or laptop or using an app. Jacaranda FM, also quite a variety of digital sources. Kaya FM, also a variety of digital sources. KFM, smart speaker. Lesedi FM, interesting, some listeners streaming in their cars. Same with Le Guala Guala, in addition to smart speakers. Lotus, Metro, Motsidinga, and Mungana, Lanene, again, quite a variety of digital sources, in addition to the DSTV radio channels. OFM, some streaming on a car radio, and then DSTV radio channels. Pala Pala, mostly DSTV radio channels. Power FM, some cell phone streaming and cell phone apps and smart speakers, and the same for Radio 2000, in addition to DSTV radio channels. Rise FM, streaming through an app. RSG, SAFM, and Tobela, apart from the DSTV radio channels. Usage of cell phone apps, smart speakers, and then because of Tobela FM, a few more digital sources. True FM, mostly DSTV radio channels. Ukhozi FM, again, a widespread of digital sources. The same with Mhlobo Wenene and Vuma FM. UFM, streaming on a website and smart speakers. Classic FM, there was some website usage and cell phone apps. LM radio, mostly DSTV radio stations, in addition to the cell phone app. Hot 1027, popular on smart speakers, PC, laptops, and then the DSTV radio channels. XKFM, no digital listening. Magic FM or Magic 828, DSTV radio channels. Then going on to the community stations, Josie FM, mostly DSTV radio channels. Izwi Lomzanzi, smart speakers and streaming on the cell phone app. Teto FM, smart speakers. Gumazi FM, either DSTV radio channels or streaming in a car radio. Nothing for Gurara or Ikora. Mahikeng community radio station, smart speaker. Maputaland community radio, quite a widespread of digital sources. Vembe DSTV radio stations, Inanda, either smart speaker or car radio. Rainbow FM, also a fairly good selection of digital sources. In Bokodo, cell phone app, Radio Zibonele, smart speaker or DSTV radio station. Then location. These I'm going to go through very quickly. I won't call out the separate stations. Most listening happened at home, as we saw earlier, or in a car. There's Algoa, Capricorn, East Coast Radio, Gagazi. So I am calling out the stations. See Capricorn and Gagazi mostly at home. That to be expected, as those stations have large non-metro audiences. Good Hope FM, again, we see car, home, but then at work is quite important. Jacaranda, Hart, and Ikwekwezi, mostly home, some in the car and at work. Kaya FM, at home, in the car, at work. KFM, some at work in addition to the car or at home. Lesedi FM and Le Guala Guala, mostly at home. Lotus FM, public transport, or at home. Sorry, I think I must apologize. I think there's something that's shifted here. I'm sure these figures are for at home or in the car or at work. We'll correct those. For OFM, Pala Pala, Power FM, and radio at home or in a car. For OFM, some at work. Rise FM, at home in a car. RSG, mostly at home and some in the car. SAFM, at home and in a car. And Tobela FM, at home. True FM, mostly at home. Ukhozi, mostly at home, and Mhlobo Wenene, the same. Vuma, mostly at home. UFM at home, in the car or at work. Classic FM at home. LM radio at home and in a car. Smile FM, mostly in a car. Hot 1027 at home or in a car. XK FM all at home. And Magic 828 at work, in a car or at home. For the community stations, Jozi FM, Izwi Lumzanzi, Teta FM, and Kazi FM, all at home. The same for Nkomazi FM, Kurara FM, Maikeng community radio stations, and Ekora FM. For Maputaland, Vembe, Inanda, and Rainbow stations, all mostly at home. Except for Rainbow, there's some listening in the car and some at work. In Bokodo and Radio Zibanele, mostly at home. Right, let's look at radio behavior within the provinces. Let's start with Eastern Cape. Here we are showing the deduped transmission source. So 92% terrestrial only, 6% digital, and 3% both. 80% of listening took place at home. We're looking at a weekend audience of 44%, weekday 53%, and a weekend of 52%. We look at the quarter-hour trend by weekday versus weekend. So weekday, I mean Monday to Friday versus Saturday to Sunday. We see listening picking up in the mornings at 5. It peaks particularly around 7 o'clock in the morning for weekday listening and remains slightly lower for weekend listening. We see around 12 o'clock weekend listening taking over or being a bit more prevalent, and also later in the day. Share of audience, so if we gross up all the radio listeners in Eastern Cape, and this does include duplicate listeners, and we look at the share of each station, we see Mhlobo Wenene owning 56% of ears, and then followed by quite a long list of other stations. If you look at share of listening in terms of minutes, you see quite a similar picture, 64% of all listening time owned by Mhlobo Wenene, and then the stations are going over Kosi and so on. Free States. Here we're looking at 94% terrestrial only, 3% digital only, and 2% both. Majority of listening at home, followed by car and work. On average, large or bigger audiences or higher penetration compared to Eastern Cape. So the weekend audience of 51%, weekday 61%, and an average week Monday to Sunday 60%. The quarter-hour pattern is similar to Eastern Cape, with late morning listening being more prevalent over weekends than during the weekday. Here, Lesedi FM owns 59% of ears and 69% of listening time. In Gauteng, we see a slight increase in digital or both, but still most of the listening is done terrestrially, at home or in the car, and some at home and some at work. Average week audience, Monday to Sunday, 51%, weekday audience, 53%, and weekend audience, 45%. Again, similar pattern. The listening day starts at around 5. And then during the week, later morning listening increases quite fast. Over weekends, we see much later in the morning, around 10 to 11, the listening is higher. So in contrast to Eastern Cape and Free State and Gauteng, we see quite a large repertoire of stations vying for listening time and for ears. We see Metro FM, Ukhozi, Leseda, Tobela, 947, Motsweding and Jacaranda being quite close together, and similarly for the listening time. Similar set of stations except Radio 2000, which has quite a lot of listening time compared to a station like 947. In KwaZulu-Natal, 90% terrestrial, 6% both terrestrial and digital, and 4% digital only. Here, home listening predominates. 55% of or reach in the weekend, weekday and Monday to Sunday, average week. As in the other provinces, listening picks up around 5 in the morning, and over weekends, listening continues later in the morning, or even up till 2 o'clock, compared to weekdays where listening tends to drop a bit across the day. KwaZulu-Natal has a similar setup compared to Free State and Eastern Cape, with a single station dominating the share of ears and the share of listening time, and that station being Ukhozi FM. It's followed by Gagazi and East Coast Radio, both in terms of share of audience and share of listening. In Limpopo, very little digital listening, nearly all of it is terrestrial, happening at home. Quite a high weekday audience, 56%, then a 54% average week and 47% for the weekend. Limpopo is quite interesting compared to some of the other provinces. We see quite a peak in listening over the weekend in the early evening at around 6 to 8. Here there are 3 sort of stations vying for share of audience and share of listening: Tobela FM, Pala Pala FM, and Mongana Lonene. In Mpumalanga, 92% terrestrial only and 4% each for digital only, and both digital and terrestrial. A slightly higher car radio compared to some of the other provinces, but mostly at home. A 48% Monday to Sunday audience, 49% weekday, and 42% average weekend. Like in Limpopo, the weekend audience really picks up in the late morning before noon, but there's not that same peak in early evening listening. Here we see quite a lot of stations like we saw in Gauteng, vying for share of audience and share of listening. In terms of share of audience, Ligwala Gwala, Ikwekwezi, Ukhozi, Mongana Lunene, Metro, Jacaranda and Tobela, and the similar set of stations in terms of share of listening time. Northern Cape, all listening terrestrial, mostly at home, some in the car and some at work. The audiences are slightly lower compared to Mpumalanga or Limpopo, with Monday to Sunday average audience being 42%, weekday 42%, and weekend 41%. Here we do see weekend listening starting quite early, and being quite higher, quite a bit higher than the weekday listening. 2 stations dominate the share of audience and share of listening: Motsweding FM and RSG. Northwest Province, 93% terrestrial only, 4% digital only, and 3% both. Location, 81% home listening. Monday to Sunday audience, 54%, weekday, 55%, and weekend, 49%. Again, we see the weekend listening picking up quite early here and then continuing quite high throughout the morning, and then another peak in the early evening, whereas weekday listening picks up at around 5 o'clock and remains fairly constant throughout the day and then drops towards the evening. Here we see one station dominating the share of audience and share of listening, that being Motsweding, followed by Lesedi. Finally, Western Cape. Here we see the highest percentage of digital listening compared to the other provinces, 6%. But the majority is still terrestrial. 64% home listening, that's the lowest of the provinces, with 31% in the car, that's high. The average week audience, 53%, the weekday audience, 55%, and the weekend audience, 47%. Here, listening is a bit slower out of the block. It starts at around 6 o'clock. And then over weekends, that trend continues to rise throughout the morning. Like Gauteng, we see quite a range of stations competing for share of audience and share of listening. At the top is Mhlobo Wenene, followed by KFM, Hart, and RSG. If we look at share of time, we see RSG moving up to second position because of the long average listening time the station receives. Then our second last section, some of the key radio measures that you probably are waiting for. Just a disclaimer, again, I've mentioned this briefly in the passing, but our data includes measurements for Classic FM up till June this year, and for Hot 102.7 from July onwards. Right, so first the commercial and PBS stations. I show the past 7-day audience, so this is weighted in thousands, so of course FM is 7.9 million listeners, and then the yesterday or average day audience, 4.3 million. 32% of the past 7-day listeners said Ukhozi FM is the only station they listen to, and it has 4 hours and 25 minutes of time, average time for TSL. Metro FM, 5.5 million past 7 days, 2 million yesterday listeners, 10% loyal listeners, and 2 hours and 59 minutes. What I found interesting was that the loyalty tends to vary with the TSL. So if you have a higher loyalty, you also have a higher time spent listening. Lesedi FM, 4.1 million past 7 days, just over 2 million for the yesterday audience, 29% loyalty, and 4 hours and 7 minutes on average. Mhlobo Wenene, 4.7 million past 7 days, 2.8 million on the average day, 31% loyalty, and 4 hours and 23 minutes. Thobela FM, 3 million listeners in the past 7 days, 1.8 million listeners on an average day, 31% loyalty, 3 hours and 35 minutes of listening on average. Motsweding, 3.5 million past 7-day listeners, 1.7 average day listeners, 26% loyalty, and 3 hours and 49 minutes average listening time. Radio 2000, 2 million listeners in a week, or over the past 7 days, and just under 900,000 listeners on an average day, 6% loyalty, and 3 hours and 40 minutes. Gargazi FM, 1.6 million, just over 507 average day listeners, 10% loyalty, and 2 hours and 45 minutes TSL. Ikwekwezi FM, 1.4 million past 7-day listeners, just under 600,000 average day listeners, 21% loyalty, and 3 hours and 39 minutes of listening. Ligwala Gwala FM, 1.3 million listeners, just under 600,000 average day listeners, 33% loyalty, and 3 hours and 40 minutes of listening time. Continuing with the commercial and BBS stations, Mungana Lendene, 1.3 million past 7-day listeners, 800,000 average day listeners, 38% loyalty, and 4 hours and 18 minutes of time spent listening. Jacaranda FM, 1.4 million past 7 days, 700,000 average day, 23% loyalty, 3 hours and 29 minutes of time spent listening. Pala Pala FM, 1.1 million past 7-day listeners, and just under 700,000 average day listeners, 38% loyal listeners, and 3 hours and 38 minutes time. 5 FM, just over 1 million listeners in the past 7 days, just over 400,000 average day listeners, 12% loyal listeners, 2 hours and 30 minutes of listening. YFM, just over 1 million listeners, just under 400,000 average day listeners, 15% loyal listeners, 3 hours and 14 minutes of listening time. East Coast Radio, 1.2 million listeners in the past 7 days, just over 500,000 average day listeners, 18% loyal listeners, and 2 hours and 57 minutes of listening. 947, just over 1 million listeners in the past 7 days, just over 500,000 listeners on an average day, 24% loyal listeners, and 2 hours and 44 minutes of listening time. That is here just over 1 million listeners, or 1.3 million listeners, just over 800,000 average day listeners, 40% loyalty, and 5 hours and 20 minutes of listening. Capricorn FM, 600,000 past 7-day listeners, 200,000 average yesterday listeners, 7% loyalty, and 2 hours and 20 minutes of listening. Kaya FM, just over 700,000 listeners in the past 7 days, 330,000 average day listeners, 10% loyalty, and 3 hours and 24 minutes of time spent listening. KFM, just over 1 million listeners, 600,000 average day listeners, 28% loyalty, 3 hours and 10 minutes. 702, just under 800,000 past 7-day listeners, 400,000 average day listeners, 18% loyal listeners, 2 hours and 47 minutes. SAFM, 800,000 past 7-day listeners, just over 400,000 yesterday listeners, 13% loyal listeners, 3 hours and 20 minutes of time. Good Hope FM, 804,000 listeners over the past 7 days, 304,000 average day listeners, 14% loyal listeners, 3 hours and 40 minutes time spent listening. Heart 104.9, just under 800,000 past 7-day listeners, just under 400,000 yesterday listeners, 27% loyal listeners, 3 hours and 39 minutes of listening time. Algoa FM, 378,000 past 7-day listeners, 187,000 average day listeners, 34% loyalty, and 3 hours and 30 minutes of listening. Power FM, just over 300,000 past 7-day listeners, 176,000 yesterday listeners, 11% loyalty, and 3 hours and 36 minutes of listening time. OFM, 303,000 past 7-day listeners, 132,000 yesterday listeners, 21% loyal listeners, and 2 hours and 32 minutes of listening time. Vuma FM, 115,000 past 7-day listeners, 100,000 average day listeners, 16% loyalty, and 4 hours and 22 minutes of listening time. True FM, just under 300,000 past 7-day listeners, 76,000 average day listeners, 5% loyalty, 2 hours and 20 minutes of listening time. Continuing with the commercial and PBS stations, Lotus FM, 265,000 past 7 days, 151,000 average day or yesterday, 31% loyalty, 4 hours and 35 minutes of time. UFM, 107,000 past 7 days, 51,000 yesterday, 2% loyalty, 3 hours of listening time. Cape Talk, 143,000 past 7 days, 115,000 yesterday, 27% loyalty, 4 hours and 90 minutes. Radio Pulpit, 85,000 past 7 days, 33% yesterday, 8% loyalty, 2 hours and 6 minutes. Rise FM, 109,000 in a week, 41% yesterday, 41,000 yesterday, 5% loyalty, 1 hour, 42 minutes. Smile FM, 178,000 past 7-day listeners, 81,000 average day listeners, 18% loyalty, 2 hours and 40 minutes of listening time. LM Radio, 100,000 past 7-day listeners, 43% yesterday listeners, 15% loyalty, 5 hours and 38 minutes. Hot 1027, 68,000 past 7-day listeners, 42,000 yesterday listeners, 20% loyalty, 4 hours and 36 minutes of listening time. XKFM, 9,000 past 7-day listeners, 4,000 yesterday listeners, 30% loyalty, and 4 hours of listening time. Finally, Magic 88, 7,000 past 7-day listeners, 3,000 yesterday listeners, and 1 hour of listening. In terms of community stations, we're showing the stations with the base size of 30 or more. Inkonjani FM in the Eastern Cape, 124,000 past 7-day listeners, 61,000 yesterday listeners, 29% loyalty, and 2 hours and 38 minutes of listening time. Kwakwa Radio in the Free State, 81,000 past 7-day listeners, 24,000 yesterday listeners, 1 hour of listening time. Moteo FM in the Free State, 92,000 past 7-day listeners, 43,000 yesterday listeners, 2% loyalty, and 3 hours of listening time. Mosupatsela FM in the Free State, 81,000 past 7-day listeners, 23% yesterday listeners, 7% loyalty, 2 hours and 40 minutes of listening time. Josie FM, 529,000 past 7-day listeners, 235,000 yesterday listeners, 15% loyalty, 4 hours of listening time. Josie FM, of course, in Gauteng. Teso FM, Gauteng, 252,000 past 7-day listeners, 139,000 yesterday listeners, 15% loyalty, 2 hours and 51 minutes listening time. Kasi FM, 136,000 past 7-day listeners, 41,000 yesterday listeners, 36% loyalty, 1 hour and 51 minutes listening time. Rainbow FM, 116,000 past 7-day listeners, 68,000 yesterday listeners, 24% loyalty, 2 hours and 51 minutes time. Moretele Community Radio, 121,000 past 7-day listeners, 63,000 yesterday listeners, 30% loyalty, 4 hours and 8 minutes listening time. Pretoria FM, 117,000 past 7 days, 71,000 yesterday, 33% loyalty, 5 hours and 40 minutes time. Mums FM, 82,000 past 7 days, 34,000 yesterday, 93% loyalty, and 2 hours and a minute. Izu Lomzansi in KZN, 341,000 past 7 days, 167,000 yesterday, 17% loyalty, 4 hours and 51 minutes. Maputaland Community Radio Station in KZN, 124,000 past 7 days, 34,000 yesterday, 36% loyalty, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Ukora FM, 126,000 past 7 days, 41,000 yesterday, 1 hour and 24 minutes. In Bokodo, still in the KZN, 127,000 past 7 days, 72,000 yesterday, 18% loyalty, 3 hours and 54 minutes time. Inanda, 88.4, 129,000 past 7 days, 46,000 yesterday, 19% loyalty, 2 hours and 45 minutes of time spent listening. And finally in KZN, Nongoma FM, 102,000 past 7 days, 24,000 yesterday, 18% loyalty, 1 hour and 59 minutes. Vembe in Limpopo province, 116,000 past 7 days, 37,000 yesterday, or average day, 21% loyalty, and 1 hour and 47 minutes. Energy FM, still in Limpopo, 73%, 73,000 past 7 day listeners, 41,000 yesterday, 14% loyalty, 2 hours and 22 minutes. Univen Community Radio, Limpopo Province, 82,000 past 7 days, 19,000 yesterday, 9% loyalty, 1 hour and 30 minutes. Nkomazi FM, that's also Limpopo Province, 133,000 past 7 days, 41,000 yesterday, 16% loyalty, 2 hours and 7 minutes time. Moitse Community Radio, 79,000 past 7 days, 39,000 yesterday, 57% loyalty, and 6 hours and 57 minutes. And finishing off community stations, Kurara FM in Northern Cape, 100,000 past 7 day listeners, 32,000 yesterday, 58% loyalty, 2 hours and 24 minutes. My King Community Radio Station, 111,000 past 7 days, 71,000 yesterday, 32,000, 32% loyalty, 5 hours of listening. Radio Zibanele, 194,000 past 7 days, 49,000 yesterday, 39% loyalty, and 4 hours and 12 minutes. And in Western Cape, CCFM, 162,000 past 7 days, 96,000 yesterday, 33% loyalty, 3 hours and 42 minutes. Radio Tygerberg, 165,000 past 7 days, 81,000 yesterday, 22% loyalty, 5 hours and 12 minutes. And finally, Eden FM, 120,000 past 7 days, 56,000 yesterday, 34% loyalty, and 3 hours and 14 minutes. Right, having done that tongue twister, I hope my percent and loyalties didn't get too mixed up. Finally, I'll share with you a section that we've added new to Catty-Dart, wasn't previously in audience research. We asked respondents if they have stopped listening to any station. If so, what did they do? What was the reason for that? And did they switch to another station? I'd like to leave time for questions. So I'll just quickly point out a few, we'll show a few pointers. I'm not going to go into much detail into all of this. We see on average 22% of listeners saying they've stopped listening to a radio station. That is most likely or more likely to happen in metropolitan areas compared to rural areas. And below you can see the numbers of people who stopped listening. The station I'm just showing you some of the stations that they said they stopped listening to. 11% Metro FM. Sorry, there's some labels skipped here. 5% Lesedi FM, 5 FM, and so on. I'll just fix that so we can see all the stations that should go there. The most important reason was that I prefer another station, followed by the reception in my area or for the station wasn't good. My routine changed, followed by I disliked the content. I didn't like the station anymore. I disliked the programming, didn't like the music. I moved to another place and there's not enough local content. Those are the key reasons. We then showed broken down by station. So this follows the order of stations that people stopped listening to. So I'm just going to show you the first 6 or so to save time, but the rest of the stations are in this deck. So in terms of Metro FM, the biggest reason there was I prefer another station, followed by my routine changed, or I don't have time to listen to it anymore. The second station that was missing on that previous chart is Ukhozi FM. 14% saying I prefer another station, or I have reception issues in my area. For Lesedi FM, routine change, 18%, 15% saying I prefer another station. By the size of these percentages, you can see that there usually is quite a wide range of reasons why people stop listening to a station. The next 3, Radio 2000, 13% said I prefer another station. 5 FM, 22%, I did not like the music or the song they were playing on the station, followed by my routine changed. Gagazi FM, 16% I do not like the programming, or I prefer another station. So we can see a wide range of reasons, but also the reasons are not exactly the same per station. There are different reasons driving stop listening or switching. So my apologies to the broadcasters of these stations for skipping over them so quickly, but they are in the deck. We asked people what did they do when they stopped listening. Most of those people said I switched to another radio station. A third said I listened to my own music, or I did something else. 12% I used other media. 5% I switched to audio streaming. 3% I switched to a podcast service. So mostly if we consider people sitting in the car with a transistor radio on the phone or at home, it's easy to switch to another station, and that seems to be happening. And we can look at this by station. So in the case of Metro FM, most said they switched to another radio station, and that is similar across the stations. So the reason for switching or changing differ by station, but what they then do is quite similar. They all switch to another station. I'm gonna skip through these. Then the station they switched to, and this is quite an interesting story as well. So it kind of gives you an idea of what are your key competitors, where is your share of ear going if people drop off from your station. So those who switched from Metro FM switched to Ukhozi FM, Radio 2000, or Mhlobo Wenene. Again, these percentages tell us that there's quite a long tail of smaller stations that they switched to. But the sort of larger proportions go to these 3 stations. Those who switched from Ukhozi FM went to Mhlobo Wenene, or Lesedi, or Gagazi, or Metro FM. So we can see that interchange between Metro and Ukhozi. Those who switched from Radio 2000 went to Metro FM, Lesedi FM, or Ukhozi FM. So one gets the idea almost of an ecology of radio stations that interact. People switch between a certain repertoire of radio stations. I'll share three more. Lesedi, listeners switched to Motsweding, Mhlobo, and Ukozi. Motsweding listeners went the other way. They switched to Lesedi, Tobela, and Metro FM. 5FM listeners went over to Metro FM, YFM and Lesedi, and Jacaranda listeners switched over to Motsweding and Ukozi. So that brings us to the end of the deck. You can see we've got all the other stations in here that you can browse at your own leisure. Thank you very much. So that is what I have to share, and I'm sure there are lots of questions. There's a question from Lihle Mampofu. Lihle, you're on mute. I cannot hear you.
Hear me?
Hi, Lihle, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, thank you very much for the straightforward presentation, Mr. Hendrik. Going back to, sorry, your presentation, data collection method. You say you guys, you call random phone numbers. So what I want to know is, do you focus maybe on a certain area, or you just make those random calls anywhere in the country? The reason why I'm asking this is because community radios, they differ in terms of footprint, like the map coverage. Like for instance, I'm from Kanya FM in Butterworth. Our footprint is like maybe our coverage map is like 7 municipalities, local municipalities. So what I want to know, do you focus on where that particular radio station footprint is, or you just make random calls anywhere in the country? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Lihle. That's a good question. No, we do purely random calls. By definition, we don't focus on specific areas. What we are looking at is if our coverage, is good, if we cover all municipalities properly, and so that we're keeping track of. But by nature, this methodology is a random methodology, and we don't intervene in how the sample falls out, except where we see provinces falling short of the normal distribution. We try and boost numbers up. I hope that answered you, Lihle. Techno Spark, I see the name, has got the hand up. I don't know who Techno Spark is. Please unmute and ask your question. Techno Spark, go. Okay, Techno Spark, we can't hear you. Then the next person is Hafiza Karbelka. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You've got your hand up, so please ask your question. Please, you're on mute. Okay, while we wait for Hafiza, we can't hear you, Hafiza. You need to unmute to ask your question. Well, while in the meantime, I'll answer a question in the margin. Somebody's asking, are the calls done over mobile phones or landlines? Now, we call from a call center, outbound call center. Obviously, the respondents will be answering on a mobile phone. That's correct. We use an outbound call center because we program the questionnaire and the phones are linked to computers. Shangazi, you want to ask a question?
Yes, I do. Can you hear me from their side?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I've got two questions. One is, do you have this presentation on email? Are you going to send it on email after this?
Yes, I think that's the BRC who will look after that. Okay.
And my second,
I'll come in there. We will upload the presentation to the BRC website this afternoon at 3 o'clock.
Okay. 3 o'clock this afternoon. That's great. My second question is, were you using these random calls? Is it because of COVID, or is it a method that you have adopted that you're going to use moving forward?
It's a method that we will use going forward. So we never want. There are a couple of there are quite a few reasons actually. So we never want to be in a situation where we can't go into field again. So we have a dual methodology. So this portion of the study is the telephonic portion of the study. So there's no face-to-face needed. The second part of the study is a passive listening panel. And again, there's no face-to-face needed other than initial setup, if there are any technical visits needed. But for the most part, we should be able to do our process virtually. But we won't be going back to a face-to-face method.
Don't you think this will work well if you were dealing with all the national stations? Because you know, if you do this random calls, you will get their listeners anywhere else. Like for instance, unless you're saying you will be in KZN and say, let us call only KZN people. But once you say it's randoms, we might be calling someone in the Free State and end up all the 3,000 people we have spoken to anyone from KZN. I mean, how does it affect the result?
Okay, so that's a good question. So the way the study is designed is so that we can track responses on a daily basis. So we have a sampling frame, and there are many different layers to the sampling frame. As you saw in the presentation, there were, at a broad level, there was metro, urban, rural, and we have targets that we have to hit in terms of those sectors. If we are far behind on a certain sector, then we address that, and more focus is put on that sector. So if we're behind on rural, then the following day or the following week or within the month interview period, we can focus on areas, and it's on a day-by-day basis that we can monitor it. Going down to an area level, so for example, you made the example of if we're getting a lot of interviews in a particular region and not many in another region. Again, the same principle applies. So it's a constant balancing act so that we ensure that we are covering the whole of South Africa, but in a random manner.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to highlight that with stations that are not covering the entire KZN, for instance, I've noticed that not all stations, especially the provincial ones, not all of them can cover the whole province. So my worry is that if you do this random thing calling, and you pick who will be a community station or a commercial radio station that broadcasts regionally. But you'll find that some stations will cover 3/4 of the province or half. Then my question is around that. How does it benefit the station then?
Well, the study is to give an accurate view of what's actually happening in the market. And that's why we keep it random. So this is not done to benefit any one station. This is a random method where people are claiming to listen to the stations that they listen to. They claim the time that they listen to it. With all the other measures that you saw in the questionnaire, there's no guarantee that you'll get someone who will say that they listen to your station although they fit into your footprint. And that's a measure of the study. That's research. So it's not done to aid any one station. It's done so that we give all stations as fair an opportunity as possible within the study.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Gary.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Gary.
There are a number of written questions that I'll go through first before we look at any other questions. So there's an anonymous attendee. Sorry, if your name is reflecting for others, I apologize. It says anonymous for me. We previously used to have rolling 6 and 12-month data. How often will Rams Amplify be released? So we're doing this base release now. It's Q2 plus 2. The members will take a view going forward in terms of how frequently we will release. But again, it's open to what the market needs. So at this point in time, we are able to release every month. We wouldn't have a release presentation every month. So it would function very much in the same way as TV, for example. In TV, the ratings get sent platforms, and we could do that in terms of radio via the third-party data providers too. Then Melissa, hello Melissa. Hi, read the share of listening. What is the calc? I'll hand over to Hendrik for that.
Sorry, what is that?
So regarding the share of listening, what calculation?
What calculation? So for the share of listening on the left, I just added up within that province all the listeners. So counting duplicate listeners. So 3,000 people listen to the station and 5,000 listen to another station. I added them together and divided them and then percentage the radio audience on that total. So it's a gross duplicated audience. For listening, a similar procedure, I counted up all the quarter hours to the grand total of minutes, and then percentage these stations total to that. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks, Hendrik. Then we have, sorry, I'm just going through the questions. Are any surveys carried out in our area, Helderberg, Somerset West, etc.?
I'm sure that I can check that for you. We record district municipality when we do the interview, and also the suburb, so we can check how many we've done for that region. So it looks like Gary's screen is frozen. I'll just go through the questions here. The Q&A. Okay, that was a question from Kathy. That was the Heidelberg Summer Special. We can check that for you. Deborah Skippers, what time will the data be available? Gary will have to answer that. Brad Agner, considering the low incidence of 15 to 17-year-olds in the sample, was this a case of getting very high refusal rates? Yeah, absolutely. That is a challenge for us. It's because of the POPI requirements. When we do a phone interview, we have to ask the respondent in that age group to speak to their parent or guardian, get their permission, and then continue with the interview. So that's been a huge challenge, lots of drop-offs. We're trying household flooding to see if we can increase those numbers. Okay, then about how we do the calls. So we don't call via mobile phones. We use an outbound call center linked to computers. Obviously, respondents answer on mobile phones because it's a mobile number, but we're using a call center. Have we done any surveys in... that's Kathy's question again that I've answered. So as a community station, how would we know our figures? That's a question from Harlan. We'll know the figures when we get listeners on a random basis for your radio station. So we keep continuously checking how the sample falls out by district municipality and by suburb and subplace, and hopefully we can build sample. We have not included all the community stations in this deck. There are many more with numbers, but the raw samples were below a certain level, so we excluded them from today's presentation. A copy of the questionnaire, we can certainly share that. That was Patricia's question. Minos Kesaris, when will RAMs available on Telma? Gary will need to answer that. What was there's a question from a pair RN. What was the criteria on the focus of the research, particularly on community radio station? I know that few stations were not included on. Yeah, so there's only criterion is a random call, and we ask whoever we find on the phone what radio station do they listen to. In the background, we check how the sample falls out, what the coverage quality of the coverage is, but we don't decide up front that we're now going to do interviews with community radio stations. We give every respondent or every random number in the list an equal chance of answering. And then a question from Brandon, have you decided whether to make the data available to all? Yeah, I'm sure that it will be available to everybody. So those are the questions I could see in the Q&A. I don't know if, I've been talking to myself.
No, Hendrik, you're not talking to yourself. We can
Okay. I think, well, there's still lots of people on the call, so yeah, that's any other questions? Anybody who wants to put up their hand and ask a question?
Hi, Hendrik, it's Sipo here.
Yeah, Sipo.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a comment. And thank you very much for the presentation. And also thank you for adding that switching slide. At least it will help us with the competitor analysis. That's all.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, that's always good to have additional stuff to help you with understanding and analysis. That was the aim.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Harlan Klitter. Harlan, you're on. There you go.
Yeah,
Yes.
Hendrik, I'm in the Cape Winelands, and I didn't see any of our stations sampled there in this area. So, what do we read into this? Is it because in the previous presentation, there was a whole list of all the community stations in the province, and one could track the number of listeners. So, do we then, if we go out to the community, do we go on the old statistic, or how do we say, are we represented in terms of footprint?
Okay. Now we have all registered radio stations on our list. It could be a case that some of your stations, we didn't include them because of the base size, but they might still be there. We've got on our list over 300 radio stations.
Okay, and I'm just saying, in the last sample, we were at about 65,000 weekly listeners as a community station. Now, are you saying at 3 o'clock they will release a presentation where those updated figures will be there, or do go, if we're not there, we go on that 2021?
So this deck will be released. So there's still the readership or the listenership report that we need to put together that will list all radio stations.
Okay.
Yeah, Holland, I mean, it would help if you, what radio stations are you?
Casey, we are Casey in Paul.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, we will have a look, and I'll speak to Gary. But if it, yeah.
You want me to speak to Gary afterwards? Or what? Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I lost connection there, and I've lost.
Should I repeat my question to Gary?
I think Gary's struggling with his connection.
Sorry, I lost connection.
Okay, Gary. Harlan had a question about the station in the poll. If they should still use the old readership reports, or if they can use the current. I don't think the station was included in this presentation because of the base size, but there could be audience figures. I don't know offhand, but we can check that for Harlan.
Okay. I've lost most of the questions because I lost connection, so they've all disappeared. But there are two apps which are the same question. When will the data be available on the third-party data provider software platforms? We're going to release the data via it'll be a cross-tab function on Tuesday next week. Monday is a holiday, hence we're going to release on Tuesday next week.
So Gary, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask a question. I didn't pick up in the last one that was released in March 2020. It had all the stations. I'm in the Western Cape, and it had a list of all the stations. And at that station, on that list, our station was reflected. Are we going to see another presentation like that? Which I didn't pick up on this one, where that comes out at 3 o'clock. Is there a detailed one of all the stations per province, like the last release in March 2020?
Yes, Holland, we most certainly can release that. However, the sample size that we're currently at is just over 15,000 respondents. A full year's sample will be 36,000 respondents. Hence, quite a few of the community stations, because they are smaller in size, their base sizes are not necessarily big enough to draw reliable, valid conclusions on. If your base size isn't big enough, then your data won't be stable. But we can most certainly release that data, but we'd have to put a disclaimer which would reflect that the base size is not big enough, if that is the case.
Okay, no, it's just a question. Last year at the March 21, we were at 65,000 weekly listeners. And I'm asking, if we go to advertisers, for example, locally, can we still use that data, or will we be reflected in the news? What I'm asking from a community radio station perspective.
This is the new currency, Holland. So this will be the currency used going forward. I would not use the previous data set. It's old data. It won't reflect what's going on in the market right now.
Okay, so there will be, so there will be a figure for our station that will be released on Tuesday.
Yes, but the base, there will be a disclaimer that the base size may be too small, Holland. I don't have all the stations in front of me, but if it's not been included in this release, then your base size is, there's an issue with the base.
Okay, all right.
Just trying to see if there are any more questions. And I do apologize if I've missed your questions. I lost connection for whatever reason. And all the questions have disappeared. I'm just going into the chat to see. There's a recommendation that I turn off my video so that you don't lose me again. So I think I'll do that. There's a question from Sean that says, thank you for the presentation and research. As a community station in KZN, we were shown to be one on the share of listening. What does that mean? How many listeners would that show we have? Sean, I believe if you were included, that in the section where it showed listenership past 7 day and yesterday, you will see weighted figures for how many people listen to your station. Neo asks, is Radio 2000 still the fastest growing station? We would not be able to tell you that, Neo. This is our first release. We're not trending data from the previous Rams, so we would not be able to base an insight like that on anything really. You would have to wait for further releases to make a statement like that. Will there be listenership figures included for all the youth stations, like the likes of Tix FM, UJFM, MFM, etc.? If respondents have claimed to listen to those stations, most certainly they will be included. Absolutely. And the list of stations that we have at a prompted level is all-encompassing. Every single station in the country is included there. And I just remembered that Brad Agner had a question around the age 15 to 17 demographic. If I remember correctly, he was asking that the low numbers that we have for age 15 to 17, is that because there was a high refusal rate, or was it because they're not listening to radio? And what we're seeing is there is a high refusal rate. So we have to ask permission of legal guardians to interview anybody under the age of 18. And what we're finding is there's a lot of refusal. There are concerns over data privacy, safety. Parents and guardians out there are very protective of their young ones, and yeah, it's very difficult to reach that part of the market. Just looking further down. Okay. In the question and answer section from Brandon, hi Gary, already asked, but just want to clarify, Hendrik City believes the data would be freely available on all cross-tab platforms, soft copy included, is that right? For now, it's being released to Talmar and Nielsen / Ariana. For this data to be released on other cross-tab platforms, we'd have to have bureau agreements in place. So we're not against sharing this data on other platforms. We just have to cross our T's and dot our I's.
So I saw Peter de Nobrega had his hand up, but I think he's now left. Sorry.
Okay.
He's back. Peter, you have your hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Hi guys, congratulations. It's a milestone day for us. Just one request speaking, I think for the programmers who will pay very careful attention to these figures. Is it possible that you could pop in a slide going forward, because we forget so much of key events which affect listening habits? I'm thinking of, for example, when did we enter lockdown 4? When did we leave lockdown 4? In July, you would have an event which
Yes, we can certainly do that. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you, Peter.
the July event certainly would have created a shift from music radios to talk radios, news-based radios. That's my request going forward. So in analyzing it, one is aware of factors which influenced listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Right, there are other questions. Okay, so from Anonymous, out of interest, why did Mix FM not come up? Also, could we ask perhaps a version is given to the industry an hour before so we can prepare questions accordingly? Okay, so related to Mix FM, in terms of this portion of the study, we don't ask respondents any whys. So if Mix FM comes up, I'm sure everyone would agree if we had to go through every station with every respondent, we'd have a lot of dropouts. So this is not a directional study. This is a listenership portion of the study, and it gives us listenership. So if Mix FM has not achieved the required base size, bearing in mind we're at a sample of 15,000 and our yearly sample will reach 36,000, then that's why they're not included, because their base size is possibly too small.
Yeah, Gary, sorry, Gary. Yeah, so Mix is in the database,
Okay.
but the raw sample was maybe too low for this deck. But there is a figure for Mix FM.
Thanks, Hendrik. Then another question, why did some stations experience huge growth in numbers, but others stayed the same or quite low? I know we can't compare to old currency, but it caught my attention. Okay, so that's a very big point. We can't compare it to the old currency. The methodology for the 7-day diary compared to the methodology that we're doing now, they're worlds apart. They're totally different studies. A lot has happened since the previous study to where we are now. There's been massive habit change in the market. There's been massive fragmentation. We know that there's been increased listening. There's been increased consumption across the board on other mediums too. So there's major habit change going on. What I will say is, in terms of these more qualitative questions, when our passive listening panel is up and running, which will be, we will have data for the passive listening panel by the end of Q1 next year, we will be in a position to get more granular insights, to recontact panelists, to look deeper into the data. That's why we're doing it. That's why we have the panel. So yeah, those more granular insights will come, but for now, we can't tell you why some of the stations have grown in numbers. I can infer, but I don't want to do that. This is all about the research. Next question. It sounds like the community stations are battling with the research. Perhaps further education would help to explain this. This is a national study. Community stations are not being prejudiced. It is just they are so much smaller. So you're quite correct. Whilst this is a national study, we sample in all the regions too, and we break up South Africa according to areas. So there are small areas, there are EAs, which are the smallest unit that you can get. We use a geospatial mapping company called GTI, which stands for GeoTerra Image, and they provide us all our maps so that we can sample effectively, so that we can spread out our interviews the way they should be spread out. And the community stations are indeed smaller. And our sample size can only go so big because the greater your sample size, the greater the amount of money needed. And we only have a certain amount of money to conduct this research. I could tell you if we could double the amount of money we had, we would really cater for every small player in the market, but we can't double the money. It's just not feasible. This is radio research. All over the world, there are these sorts of struggles. What we have done, though, to try and combat this is to increase our sample size on both portions of the currency. So for the telephonic interviews, we've increased the sample by 6,000 respondents. And then the passive listening panel adds another 4,000 respondents. Those are daily respondents. So if you look at a cumulative figure for the sample, we've gone from 30,000 respondents to 40,000 respondents. And we are wanting to cater for the whole industry. We are wanting to get sufficient sample sizes for every single station. It's a journey. I don't see any other questions. And I think we've reached the end of our session, really. Just going to close the question and answer tab. So with that, I'd like to thank Hendrik and his team for a great presentation. Thank you. To everyone else still on the call, we urge you to engage with us more. If more questions come up, please do send them through to us. We're a very open organization and we want everybody to be on the same page. So any and all queries, please direct them to the BRC. And we really do appreciate your time. This is a very exciting time for audio measurement in South Africa. And we're looking forward to this new journey that we're on and what comes of it. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and a good weekend.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, everyone.